This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend. I've walked your snow-capped mountains.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is November 12th, 2020, and this is episode 215.
I'm Scott Dillon-Bohm.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the final votes are in, and everyone in the Lower Mainland is under a new lockdown. First, thanks to the 101 people who contribute to the show every month. You can join them at patreon.com/politicos. And while the election is over and we're in a quieter time, there's still lots of politics happening, and we can use your support to help bring on additional guests, find extra content, and really just keep growing our community. We have a great little positive community in our Slack channel, and if you become a patron, you get access to that. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Let's kick it off. Every vote has been counted. They're still counting votes in the US, and we took a 2-week pause, and we managed. I mean, our election was earlier, but Elections BC did really well. They counted 625,000 votes roughly in just over 2 days.
That's not bad. Meanwhile, Nevada, I think, is aiming to get theirs done somewhere around the second Biden administration.
I was going to say, have they even started? We're still just wondering. I did see that Alaska was just called, I think, yesterday. For all those who are on the edge of their seat wondering if the Republicans could hold Alaska, the answer is yes.
The funny thing is, when Alaska actually joined the U.S. as a state, the Republicans were against it because they thought it was a guaranteed Democratic state, which just really goes to show how much things can change.
Puerto Rico statehood, let's do it. Let's get into the final results of the BC election, though. With all these additional votes cast, the question was how many additional seats could flip. And I estimated that if there was a full 10-point stronger NDP showing in the mail-in ballots, we could see up to 6 seats flip if it was efficiently distributed across the province. Ultimately, that didn't live up to what was needed, and we saw 3 seats change hands from election night. The NDP picked up 2, Abbotsford Mission and Monashee from the Liberals, and the Liberals actually took back West Vancouver Sea to Sky, where the Greens had actually finished election night with just over 1,000 vote lead. So a lot of shifting.
Is it really taking it back, though, if there was never really the end result?
I like the phrasing that way, but you're right. All the votes were cast before election day. Fine. It feels like a bit of a race. Who was in the lead? It was like when we were watching the Toronto by-election results come in federally that were the 2 Liberals, and it was back and forth in one of the constituencies, I think York Centre, as the Conservatives were up and then the Liberals were up. And at one point, I think the Conservatives had a 1-vote lead. And then ultimately the Liberals won by a few hundred votes. So it wasn't that, or even more. It wasn't as close in the end. I don't know. We don't have a lot of exciting moments in politics necessarily. It's somewhat of a slow burn. So watching votes get counted it's the sports. It's the playoffs. So overall, there's one riding that's going to a judicial recount. That is West Vancouver Sea to Sky, because that one came down to 41 votes in the end, which is about as narrow of a margin as you can get. I mean, we had the 9-vote margin in 2017, but that was prior to the extra ballots being counted. It wasn't much bigger after that, though.
I think it grew to was it 30 or... It was definitely in the mid to high double digits, I think, all said and done.
Yeah, the NDP ultimately won the mail-in ballots pretty strongly. On election night, the NDP had 45% of the vote to the Liberals 35% and the Greens 15%. I calculated based on the change how much of the mail-in and absentee ballots went to each party. The Liberals looked to take 31% of that vote, so the 4 points weaker. The NDP took 52.5% of the mail-in votes, which was pretty much where many of the more bullish polls were putting them. I think Ipsos had them maybe even higher than that. And the Greens took just under 15% on the mail-ins. So it's clear the NDP really drove their turnout to mail-ins, which makes sense. That's where they wanted it. They called the snap election. They were in the lead. They wanted to lock in as many ballots as they could, as fast as they could. I have a full blog post that I put up earlier this week on politicos.ca where you can read more about this, and we'll link it in the show notes. I mean, the big takeaway is that it's not surprising, but each party did the strongest in the ridings that they either held or traditionally were very strong in. So the NDP's strongest mail-in ballot performance was in ridings like Langford, Juan de Fuca, or Surrey Wally, or North Coast. In all of those ridings, they got over 70% of the mail-in ballot, whereas the Liberals did well in like Kelowna Lake Country and West Vancouver, Kilchena, where they got well over 55% of the vote.
Wait, what, West Vancouver, Kilchena?
I'm mixing up that they also had West Vancouver, Capilano. They did well in ridings that are BC Liberal strongholds. But overall, I mean, the NDP outperformed their election day performance in more ridings and just had a stronger mail-in ballot performance. The West Vancouver Sea to Sky race was the really interesting one because it's there where the Greens did worse on their mail-in ballots than they did on election day. And it's possible that's because BC Greens didn't have a ground game in West Van as Sea to Sky as much as they did maybe in the two ridings that they held. And a lot of people started really taking on the Green bandwagon following the debates, and so they had to vote in person. The other parties, the NDP and the Liberals, outperformed their election day in the mail-in ballots, and that's what really helped flip that. Like the Greens needed more. It's how elections work. The Greens needed more votes to win it.
Yes, that is more or less the key thing they failed to do was get the most votes.
But it's the turnout thing, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the guaranteed thing a pundit can always say. It's going to depend on turnout and always be right. But yeah, overall, it's just not a huge surprise, I think, to see this year. Last week I was a little more bearish on the NDP's ability to translate or the NDP's ability to realize what the polling had indicated into actual additional seats flipped. So I don't know, feeling fairly good about that bit of prognostication. But I mean, I think just continues the same story as the election itself. The NDP did well, the Liberals not so much. The Greens were on the bad foot. I'm not sure if we can really pull out too much from this. What's going to, I think, be more interesting is what happens in the 2024 election when hopefully COVID is a distant memory. Does mail-in ballots feature as prominently or similarly prominently in that election? Is this the start of a longer-term trend towards that?
With turnout down so much this election over the previous ones, where we'd seen at least some possible stop to the drop in turnout, I mean, anything could happen. Meanwhile, the US had a record-setting turnout, likely because it was a far more competitive election than ours, which was pretty much a foregone conclusion. One thing that I do feel a little vindicated in was that some of the ridings that became very close races after the mail-in ballots were counted were some of the ones that I was predicting we could see flip, things like Kamloops North Thompson and Surrey White Rock and Fraser Nicola, each of those under 300 votes. What happens in 2024? I think we have a good thing in Canada where we do have a multi-party consensus that making voting easier is a worthwhile thing to do, as opposed to
nobody's taking the opposite side of that debate,
at least in this country. And the other thing coming up is we will see at some point in the next couple of years, there's a mandatory redistricting where Elections BC looks at where new seats might be needed. And the NDP has the option of, should they expand the legislature to try to accommodate the growing population in Metro Vancouver, in Kelowna, of all places, and the island.
Yeah, no, they absolutely should, if for no other reason than the fact that there is a ridiculous disparity in voting power between the northern ridings and the ridings in Metro Vancouver.
And
There
that's
were candidates that
mandated by law, right?
yeah, but there were candidates that finished third in Metro Vancouver ridings who got more votes than the winning candidates in some of the northern ridings, and that's there is a point where it just gets a little too ridiculous, the disparities, and as Metro Vancouver continues to grow, I think we've are butting up against that, if not blown past that, and maybe it needs to be like 110-seat legislature to actually make that work. But yeah, it's something we should consider.
And the other option the NDP could have is they could flex their majority muscle and change the law that protects 17 seats that are not entirely locked in for the Liberals, but do give an advantage to those northern regions. That would be controversial as hell, but it would be an interesting move in the name of democratic representative equality in terms of votes. In the meantime, though, there are only 87 MLAs going back to the legislature, and the question has come up of when will they be going back? Horgan has said he wants to have MLAs back in Victoria as soon as possible to pass a bill to authorize the Horgan bucks, the $1,000 to households and $500 to singles, who I keep seeing it's called mean tested. I guess that's technically true, because if your household makes more than $125,000 a year, you don't qualify for all of it. But that it's going to most households. The goal is to have people back soon, but given COVID-19, there may not be a fall session, he's hinted at recently.
Which is really at odds with how they portrayed themselves during the election. If it was so important that they go right then to the polls, because it was clear that, this legislature just wasn't working anymore, they needed a strong, stable majority government, to actually get stuff done, then just delaying it for 3 months until the new year just doesn't really jive with that at all. And it's got to wonder what's going on there.
I get the sense they do want to pass this sooner, but they are staring at the numbers. Now, the question has been put to the government and to the premier, couldn't you just do this by cabinet executive order? And he's technically maybe, but for the right reasons, I want to do it through the legislature. And it's too dangerous to hold the legislature, possibly. So, I don't know. He has hemmed and hawed on whether to get this out soon.
They developed a hybrid method. They can make tweaks to that. If they wanted to safely have a legislative sitting, they can absolutely find a way to do that.
I don't disagree. I do hope they get some supports out sooner, as we'll get into in the next section.
Yeah,
people are going to need stuff.
Yeah, if restaurants are open, our democracy can be open too. There's no reason you can't have both.
Maybe we can't have restaurants soon. We're getting there. But let's talk about the opposition for a second before closing off this section. The Liberals are in the news again, as it sounds like they may be picking their interim caucus leader soon, and North Kamloops and Kamloops North Thompson MLA Peter Millibar is the rumored, at least one of the rumored candidates for that interim leader position.
So yeah, Millibar is one of those Liberals that doesn't have a particularly high profile. So in that sense, I can see why he would make sense as an interim leader, precisely because he's not likely to be one of the people who's going to step up and run. Just as I don't think he has the name recognition, the organizational structure set up for that. Ideally, you want to have an interim leader that's not vying for the top spot, either that election or after. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
He's a former mayor of Kamloops. He was first elected to provincial office in 2017, taking over Terry Lake's seat. I don't know enough about the internal BC Liberal politics to know how well he'd do, but I get the sense he's probably an inoffensive choice.
And one of the benefits of having a caucus pick an interim leader is they actually know who they are and what the capabilities are, which is something that you don't necessarily get with the current method of picking leaders that has become popular in Canada, of let the members or people the candidate has sold memberships to decide who should lead.
Well, and in terms of deciding who to lead, the rumors are now pretty hot that Kamloops South Thompson MLA Todd Stone is going to be one of the first contenders in. He's got a op-ed in the Daily Hive out about his letter to his party, and he's starting to speak out about the things they didn't do after the last election, do a bit of soul searching, and what they should do going forward. And he's talking about putting off holding a leadership race until Q4 2021 and instead focus on how do we inspire people? How do we get a more diverse party that reflects all the different regions, all the different ethnicities, gender identities, etc., ages. He wants all British Columbians to be represented in the British Columbia Liberal Party. And he says he is not ruled out, and he is seriously considering a leadership bid, and this would be how you'd start it.
Yeah, it's entirely unsurprising, and this letter's clearly a testing of the waters, get his name out there thing. So yeah, not a surprise there. I'm not sure if Todd Stone is necessarily going to be the right person to lead the Liberals forward, but in terms of what's in the content of what he wrote, it's I think fairly spot on in terms of needing to actually reassess and catch the Liberals up to how the province has changed and moved along in the past decade or so. But it's not exactly clear how that actually manifests, or if Todd Stone necessarily is going to be the one who has the necessary insights into how that's going to happen. The other thing he touches on there is rename the party, which it's an idea that seems to be floating out there, but really I don't think is going to help them at all. That being called the BC Liberals is not the problem. Parties go in ebbs and flows, and basically any successful rebuilding effort will do enough to rehabilitate the brand that you don't actually have to change the name and reintroduce everyone to a BC party or whatever you want to call it. And if anything, it's just going to create more work and more hassle on that.
Yeah, Todd Stone ran in the previous leadership race, losing ultimately to Andrew Wilkinson. He was Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure in Christy Clark's cabinet, and that, as the Cullen inquiry goes on and more, there was a number of headlines that we won't touch on about money laundering and some of the scandals in the past and what the government knew or didn't know about. I wonder how much that is going to weigh on the BC Liberals going forward and specific candidates. So if Kevin Falcon or Todd Stone run, they have connections to that previous government and might have to defend it a bit more versus members who weren't ministers, who weren't at that cabinet table, might have cleaner hands and be able to better represent a new vision forward. That said, Todd Stone is one of the younger candidates. Well, he's almost 50 now, but he still has a more youthful energy, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, and if Rich Coleman was running again, I think it would be a real problem. But I mean, Todd Stone joined fairly late into the Liberal. He was first elected in 2013, and I think is not so tied to being like one of the longtime party stalwarts that it would necessarily hang around his neck too much. He didn't particularly distinguish himself as transportation minister, but yeah, maybe there is something to be said about bringing in an outsider. But I'm not necessarily sure Todd Stone is going to be the one who necessarily gets saddled too much with those issues if he was to become leader.
Oh, maybe Rick Peterson will jump in after multiple failed leadership bids for the federal Conservatives and BC Conservatives.
And try and run there or something in the last election?
Oh, I don't know where he's been recently.
Yeah, okay.
He
I
did
think I
try to
vaguely
lead
remember it
the
was no longer in BC, but I could be completely ignorant to that because he is not one of those people I closely track what he's up to.
yeah. I was just trying to
But
think
no,
who else might come in from the federal leadership race.
uh,
James Moore's the obvious choice, the former federal MP.
sorry, who didn't catch
James
that?
Moore?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, he'd I think be a great choice, but unlikely to do it with a fairly new family. I expect in the next couple of weeks, particularly after they have their interim leader in place, we'll start to hear a bit more about who's going to be running. I'm not necessarily convinced that a long leadership race is, or one that's far off, is going to be that good, because having a party that's a little bit rudderless with a interim leader that isn't really, or doesn't have the mandate to do much to really redefine the party or tack left or right, or and really adjust too much for a year or two after an election loss isn't necessarily the best thing either. And if they end up picking a status quo person, it's probably not going to matter one way or the other. But if they pick someone who actually has an idea of how to refresh the party and kind of fix some of the flaws, take it, find a new interesting direction to take it, it's better to give them as much runway as possible in the lead up to the next election and not squeeze it into 2 years or something.
Well, Rona Ambrose is not currently a sitting politician. Maybe she's available to help guide the BC Liberals. She was actually a pretty effective federal conservative interim leader.
Although she's from Alberta,
Alberta,
so
yeah.
slightly.
She might actually be busy. I was looking up her profile. She is on the board of directors for e-cigarette company Juul right now.
I think she's doing a few other things too. But yeah, not necessarily the person I'd pick to jump in for the very clear reason that she doesn't have much ties to BC.
We'll keep our eyes on the BC Liberal leadership race as it starts to take shape. And there we go. After all the votes were counted, 47% to the BC NDP, their largest caucus ever of 57. The BC Liberals down to 28 members, 34% of the vote, two BC Greens with 15% of the vote. BC NDP getting their highest vote share ever with not their largest caucus by percentage ever. I looked it up and their 72 and 99, or their 1972 and 1991 wins had larger caucuses as a percentage of the legislature just because of the split votes on the right. But it's a still pretty strong majority right now.
Well, let's move on to our next segment, Lockdown 2, Lockdown Softer. So BC is not having a great run of it when it comes to dealing with the coronavirus, as our COVID-19 cases have been spiking in the last couple of weeks. I think over the last few days, we've been averaging around 500 cases a day, which is very concerning. And these are concentrated primarily in the lower mainland, particularly in the Fraser Health region, which confusingly basically goes through the Fraser Valley up into through Burnaby and all south of the Fraser too. But City of Vancouver itself is in Vancouver Coastal Health. It's a weird boundary, but basically the Vancouver, Burnaby, Fraser Valley area is experiencing a particularly bad, especially by BC standards, outbreak of COVID-19.
But the Bella Coola Central Coast region in the middle of British Columbia, that's actually part of Vancouver Coastal Health, is still doing okay, relatively.
Yeah, and
Speaking
the other
of
thing
weird
that
boundaries,
really stands out when you look at the map, when you look at the subregions, is also Richmond, which, despite being part of Metro Vancouver and abutting everything, is actually has a much lower case count than anywhere else in either, I think, Coastal Health or Fraser Health, at least anywhere with a significant population.
but at this point, with the number of cases we're starting to see, pretty much everyone in the lower mainland or everywhere in the lower mainland is starting to see worrying growth. The modeling details were just put out today and the epidemiology updates, and they are currently estimating that The number of cases in BC is doubling within 13 days, so every 2 weeks, which is a worrying number and will potentially go faster if we don't get that under control. And one of their key measures to get that under control was a round of new public health orders issued on Saturday in a special Dr. Bonnie Henry update at 1 p.m. that basically bans all social gatherings in the Lower Mainland and also orders all businesses to update their COVID safety plans and asks bylaw officers to go and start enforcing to make sure businesses are upholding those plans, because I guess some were getting sloppy.
Start enforcing that? That really seems like the sort of thing that should
or increase enforcement.
Okay.
And there was also a closure on indoor physical activity group classes where there was potential for transmission unless gyms can show very clearly and get sign off from the public health officer in their area that they are safe. So a round of measures meant to try to suppress the large number of cases that we're seeing. Public health is asserting that these are largely household driven, and their data suggests as much, although there are still some unknown/uncategorized cases which make up big bulk in their presentation they released today. Workplaces are also still a significant source for most age groups. And of course, healthcare is a serious source in older populations, but those would be long-term care homes. And that's where we need it to not get, because that's where fatalities happen quite frequently, unfortunately. And that's what we're also starting to see spike. So everything is trending bad.
Yeah. So I think we've, in BC, has taken let's call it, we've basically rested on our laurels and gotten really complacent after the first couple months where this kind of BC exceptionalism narrative took off, which was completely unjustified, but became part of the provincial mythos of how we were handling it, when I think it's pretty clear in hindsight, it was more or less just a case of good luck on our part that we didn't have any early super spreader events and cases remained fairly low. And as a result, a bunch of people have gone and not taken the right precautions, and things are spreading quite a bit.
I think it is reasonable to say that the province reacted pretty well in the spring. Like, we had a sense that things were shutting down, that things needed to shut down, and there was an air of seriousness being taken about it. Through the summer, public health messaging softened a bunch and talked about how you can have fun, and we were able to do some things outside, and outside is safe. I think the weather turned cold pretty early this year, and that drove more people inside, and inside is a pretty high vector. And then you mix that more dangerous gathering with people who haven't started taking it seriously again. And that's how it feels like, at least to me, we've gotten where we are. Now, that said,
also, I think the government could have done a lot more on this too. So one of the things that was announced in there is, as part of the weekend update and the new measures, is that they were shutting down party buses, which, like, what the hell? Why were these even allowed to operate 9 months into a pandemic? There's a lot of things like that where it seems like they're just behind the 8 ball in a lot of ways, and doing stuff now that they should have done much earlier.
I think people didn't remember that party buses were a thing. I didn't remember until they're like, these aren't allowed. You know? And maybe those should have been in the order when they closed nightclubs. But if there aren't a lot of party buses, then there probably aren't a lot of party bus super spreaders events, even though it only takes one, because they're a very gross, germy spreading situation, I have to imagine. I think one of the challenges is whether the language has been strong enough from public health, and did it start? It's clearly ramped up, right? They're using more strong language. They're back to, we need to bring this all, but there's still been a lot of challenges in the last week. The public health order that was issued on Saturday, the official text only came out today, and there was a page on the website, because the public health orders can be issued verbally or just by a FAQ on the government's website. And that was changed multiple times through the week as they tried to clarify the language. And I saw a lot of people were confused by it. And the simplest message was just what Adrian Dix repeated a couple times, which is just, whatever you are, if you have questions about whether you should be doing something right now, you should just not do that thing, which is nice on a simple level, but doesn't actually answer, then why am I going to work, for some people who have no other choice. And they've encouraged more work from home, but it's not as strong. So I think people are seeing a bit of contradiction in, why is this open? Why is that closed? Even where there are some good arguments, the complexity isn't getting through when you need a simple, clear message, I think, is the challenge.
Yeah. And that's, I think, also where we've fallen down a bit on this, is the messaging could definitely be improved. There was a lot of confusion, like you said, on the weekend. A bunch of people questioned, okay, they talked about households, but what about people who live alone? And there was weird stuff there about, okay, you can actually see people who are outside of your household, but only if you live. It just was not very clear overall. And there is a place for nuance and complexity, but when you're trying to get 5 million people who pay attention at various degrees, with various levels of understanding of the situation and everything else, like, there's just something to be said for just keeping it very simple and being very clear, not really having too much detail going into it at all. And I think this is where the message could have been both clearer and a little stronger, because the other thing that's public health has been doing, and the provinces, they're in the sternly worded letter and statement phase of trying to do things for the most part, and that may get you a good portion of the way there, but we strongly recommend ETS. It's not really 98% as strong as ETS is mandatory, and it's much weaker than that. I'm not necessarily sure the people doing the communication have really understood that or exercising that in a particularly good way. And as a result, I think there's still a lot of cases where people aren't necessarily doing all they could be. And maybe we should look at doing more things that are mandatory, because that does, in fact, indicate a much stronger societal imperative to do something.
Yeah, from day one of the pandemic, BC has always taken BC Public Health has taken what's the least restriction we can put on, like public health orders, and mandating things is a last resort. So I get and do actually appreciate the approach they're trying to take for the most part. I mean, I also get that if they do mandate a number of things, they realistically, for the large part, aren't going to be enforced. We don't have that many cops. And do we really want that many? And is that a useful purpose, as opposed to the number of other ways they can be going about promoting this?
Everything in the criminal code, like, some portion of that does not actually get enforced. The police don't address 100% of all crimes. There's resources for that. Nevertheless, as a society, we generally feel that's imperative to have those laws and try and do our best to actually enforce them, even when it's not going to be perfect. And do we want more people out there enforcing mask mandates, for example? Yeah, I think so. Last couple times I've gone grocery shopping, there's still far too many people who aren't wearing masks when they're doing that. It's even simple things like that. So yeah, there's a time and a place for kind of recommendations and a hands-off approach, and maybe a global crisis is not that time.
We'll have to see where things trend over the next week or so. I don't know if anyone has a good sense of how well this new order is being followed in the first 5 days of it, because I don't know, most of the people I know have been fairly self-isolated since March, and I don't know the people who are having house parties and causing bigger problems. It's not my social circle. So I guess we'll just have to keep watching the numbers. The one thing that's maybe a little bit optimistic is we're still not the worst jurisdiction in Canada.
That's a low bar, but
it's like our climate policy. We have the continent-leading climate change plan, even if it may not be necessarily strong enough to meet our targets.
So this is one of the things that is just driving me up the wall is this, even now BC's doing okay. People are still doing well. If you slice the data exactly this way, we're actually doing really good takes on Twitter and stuff, which is just don't. But besides from that, we give the Americans crap for being super focused on just what's going on in their own country, but Canadians are barely any better. If it's not something that happens within the confines of North America or maybe one of 3 countries in Western Europe, we just don't pay attention at all to it. And it might as well not exist as far as most Canadians are concerned. And we've been busy for the last 6 months telling ourselves how great BC is for how we've handled COVID, and the government got reelected on that as one of the strong messages that carry them to a majority when we're clearly not there. It's not happening. Yeah, we don't necessarily. Yeah, it's unreasonable to expect us to be the best jurisdiction in the world for handling this, but we're not even cracking the top 10. And this should not be an acceptable level of COVID response. And hopefully this engenders some self-reflection on the part of the province. But simple things like not closing down the party buses until I think it was 284 days after the first COVID case in BC. And this is, I think, going to be the risk for governments going forward, is we were willing to cut them a fair bit of slack in the first couple months. But, I mean, at this point, we're 9 months into it since the first case here in BC. It's coming up in another month, it'll be a year since the first cases were identified and reported globally. And at this moment, I think there's very little excuse for governments not to be prepared and doing everything they can. And we're in an emergency, this is happening fast, doesn't really cut it this far in anymore. And we saw that today when Dr. Henry said that the contact tracing resources are being stretched thin. And sure, we've had a spike, but how is it 9 months into this thing and we aren't prepared and have the resources ready to handle the contact tracing on 500 cases a day? Everyone knew this was a level that we could easily hit. Why isn't the government ready for it in the middle of November?
I mean, we have hired more contact tracers than, at least as far as I can tell, most other provinces. And that's not just to say we're doing better. I mean, I do want to put us in context. Globally, right now, we're seeing massive spikes, and I'm by proportion in Italy, Sweden, America, Germany, like off the charts relative to where we are in Canada.
I mean, 3 of those 4 were notorious for handling the first part not great.
Across Canada, Manitoba is out of control right now. They've just had 9 deaths and 474 cases in the past 24 hours. And Manitoba's population is, a quarter of ours? Alberta, similarly, has just introduced restrictions after they've been jumping ahead of us for a couple of weeks. And their restrictions, which look like ours 2 weeks ago, are coming in today. Quebec is still high, maybe on an upswing. Ontario was going up, but we just surpassed them the good provinces are in Atlantic Canada and in the north. I think the Nunavut just posted its first 3 cases, but they pretty much can name the people.
Yeah, there's only 30,000 people living there, and most settlements are pretty small. So even if it burns through an entire settlement, it's unlikely to hop too far over to the next community.
But I mean, on the we're not doing things right thing, I'm not totally disagreeing with you. In this past couple of days, Justin Trudeau was talking to the Financial Times, talking about how we don't necessarily need to make these benefits permanent, and we're still like rolling them back at a time when we're seeing a second wave. So like now is the time that we need to reinvigorate the CERB and these new benefits and really make sure people are using or fix the paid sick leave program that the federal government introduced that doesn't actually help people. Like, I went through what it takes to get this paid sick leave. You need to be off for the majority of a week. So if you have a cough tomorrow, go get a COVID test. It takes, say, a day to turn around, and you have to take another day off. You've taken 2 days off of work in a week. But it turns out negative. You can't really claim that back. So you don't really get paid sick leave unless you're really sick, which is not helpful. Why are we still here? We've known for a long time that paid sick leave is a very good thing and we should have it. Why don't we have it? And why are they lying?
And why did we necessarily roll or start to transition off the CERB? So I get the importance of saying these aren't going to be permanent. These very much are benefits that are hugely expensive and I think pretty reasonable to address the current crisis. Continuing those benefits indefinitely for years and decades on end without necessarily having thought those through or having the necessary fiscal systems in place to support them is very challenging and something that I don't think a responsible government would signal at this time. So that's entirely reasonable, but not permanent, and we're going to ease off of them before the second wave when, generally I believe the consensus is that second waves are worse than first waves. I remember hearing about that back earlier in the year, about how 1918 was like that and a few other pandemics have been like that as well. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the second wave hits big and hard. So it was weird to scale those back at the end of the first wave before the second one hit. And yeah, fine. Don't make it permanent. That's entirely reasonable, and I'd argue the responsible thing to do, but not permanent and ending in August are not the same thing.
And there's a little bit of hope out there right now, right? There was some positive news about this Pfizer vaccine that may be ready in the new year, although that will not go out to everyone very quickly because because of technical reasons, it needs to be kept at very low temperatures. That's difficult. And so manufacturing a lot of it and getting it out to a lot of people will be hard. So we're not solving this right away. Stay home, people, wash your hands. Would be nice if we managed to emphasize, like, a lot of this is being put on just, we need to keep things open. And I get the value of keeping schools open in terms of having, especially like teenagers in one place where they're not just randomly mingling, at least they're mingling with the same people every day. But a lot of things don't need to be open right now, maybe.
Yeah, and we're talking about how other jurisdictions have done. Places like Australia and South Korea and New Zealand, those countries at various points, I don't know as much about South Korea, but have done pretty aggressive but relatively short lockdowns, just crushed the virus, and were able to reopen into a fairly normal kind of day-to-day life with options to bring things back down if needed, like Australia just done on the second time. Like maybe we should be looking at that model than this one, which is, I guess, the other kind of question I have is we're not going to try and stamp out the virus, but we're also not going to let it run rampant. And on one hand, I understand that, but the more I think about it, the more I just question the underlying assumptions on whether or not that's actually feasible. And just from a practical matter, the underlying mechanics of this are exponential, and we have a 1 to 2 week delay between any action we take and being able to measure the outcome of that. And trying to keep, the R number in a very narrow range of basically exactly 1 for months on end just does not seem something that can practically be done very well. And maybe one of those things that works great when you model it out, but as a public policy measure, it may be too hard to achieve in practice. And maybe we would have been better off just consistently trying to aim for 0.75 R value and slowly just eliminate it and prevent it from coming back. Because it may be in some ways a little more aggressive or harder on some people and the system, but on the other hand, it may actually be easier to achieve than just keep things indefinitely in a very narrow band that's required to keep an exponential system at operating at a constant rate.
It's difficult. Neither of us are epidemiologists or public health experts. I think everyone is frustrated. We are seeing lots of different techniques around the world, some definitely more effective. I'm so thankful our public health officials didn't go down the clearly flawed thinking that the Swedish health officials did, where they were like, what if everyone just gets infected? And turns out that's bad, real bad. On the other hand, we didn't have the approach that like Vietnam or the countries you talked about where they do lock it down. Vietnam didn't have a strong healthcare system to deal with it, so they just locked the country down. But because they needed to make sure people survived, they gave everyone food deliveries and helped make sure they didn't have a first wave. They've had a few more cases after that initial lockdown. I haven't looked more recently, but there are lots of different models to this, and it'll be something to look back upon when we all get through this, hopefully, to see what we can learn about how to effectively manage a pandemic in this era, because people keep telling me we're going to see more of them based on climate change and global population shifting and everything else. Maybe it won't be our last.
Yeah, the only other thing I think I'll say on this before we move on is that we've vented our frustrations a bit here. But we're not the only ones feeling a little frustrated at this situation, and we're getting, I think, pretty close to the point where a lot of people are going to stop giving governments the benefit of the doubt on this one, which is going to make things quite a bit rockier and more hazardous politically, which is something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on in the coming weeks and months.
Moving on to quick takes, just a couple quick stories. First up, the federal Liberals are down a member of parliament as Don Valley East MP Yasmin Ratansi has left caucus to sit as an independent. CBC News learned that she'd been employing her sister in her constituency office since 2017. She'd previously done this prior to 2012 when she was an MP, but it wasn't strictly illegal then. You just couldn't hire your...
We got around to changing that in 2012?
So there were rules about employing family members before that, but it didn't include siblings.
Huh.
So that was what got added.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
We're still ahead of the U.S. on this one. At least we don't have the Trudeau family running around
yeah,
staffing high level offices or high level roles in the PMO.
there's a number of other scandals that the Liberals have been hit by. Ratansi had apparently been covering this up by asking her sister to use a fake name and even telling her staff who knew about this to just keep it quiet. Some of her staff in another CBC piece have alleged that this MP created a, quote, abusive and toxic environment, including by using a bunch of racist stereotypes for Chinese, South Asian, and Caribbean constituents, going so far as to influence and try to shut down certain immigration files of people she didn't like, which is a pretty damning allegation.
People she didn't like in this case basically being certain ethnic groups.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear about this.
Just to be super clear, this wasn't like personal animus because that person's a bit of an asshole. It's racist.
Yeah, the allegation is that she said there are too many Chinese here already. So,
big not on that one.
Yeah, the Conservatives have demanded that the Speaker launch a further probe into this member beyond her just sitting as an independent. They've called for her to, resign her seat as well. Really weird story with lots of dark sides to it. And I'm not sure if we'll see more about this, but the fact it hit multiple days of news wasn't good for the Liberals.
No, definitely not. And isn't going to have as much resonance as their past or most recent other scandal. Yeah, it's nevertheless not a great thing for them, obviously. And I can't say I feel the Conservatives are overreaching too much when they ask for her to step down over this. It may be one of the few cases where they're not actually going too overboard on their outrage. Although I'm sure a few of them have. Just knowing how the party works.
And finally, the BC Civil Liberties Association launched a fairly big case this week against the RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki. So this dates back to a complaint the BCCLA had launched over the treatment of protesters against the Northern Gateway Pipeline back in 2014. The BCCLA was concerned that the RCMP was illegally spying on these protesters and otherwise overreaching with its powers. The complaint went to the Civilian Review and Complaints Commissioner, who's the office that deals with these kind of complaints. And there was an interim report filed in June 2017, over 3 years ago. And that report was given to the RCMP commissioner, and it doesn't get to be made public until the commissioner responds to it. And so now it's not clear if the commissioner has been purposefully just sitting on this report. The law requires she give a response, and that's what the BCCLA is suing to try to enforce, is to make the commissioner follow the law. Now, the law is a little vague. It says they have to respond in a reasonable amount of time, and I think the commissioner is alleging that it's a very complex issue, and there's a lot of reports on my desk, so it takes time to dig through all of this.
I know a judge is probably going to see 3 years as an unreasonable amount of time.
And that's kind of the thing. The BCCLA is launching this amid a number of different groups that have at different times brought forward complaints to the commissioner or to the complaints commissioner about the RCMP and their practices. And it seems like a lot of these reports take a long time. There was a report that just came out today from the complaints commissioner based on the RCMP reactions to anti-fracking protests in New Brunswick in 2013, 7 years ago. That report clears many of the officers as acting reasonably, but does flag concerns with how the cops gathered intelligence, and specifically flags them breaking charter rights by stopping people randomly on the way in and out of some of these spots. If we want a police force if we want to have police forces, they need to be accountable in some way, and not finding out about whether their actions are reasonable for 7 years seems not effective.
Yes, it's definitely one of those areas that I think pretty much everyone can agree that having increased accountability is not only a good thing, but necessary. So yeah, it would be definitely good to see the laws around this and the procedures tightened up quite a bit.
So we'll keep our eye on that case and everything else that's happening. As always, thanks to my cat for helping us finish the show.
And that has been Playtoast. Find links to everything we talked about at playtoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Playtoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.